Thank you.
So good to see you. How are you?
I am excellent, thank you, Tim.
Fantastic, fantastic. So I'm glad I wore a good suit because that's a nice suit. I know a little whistle, thing about a whistle. So I'm
This
pleased.
is when you'll start shouting right now. Yep, you
Get
need
ready.
to start right now.
Get ready. See, the advantage is that you can't see me going into deep, but please keep us on track. So, you've been busy. You've been traveling around. You're leading a fantastic vehicle that's empowering millions of people to have jobs. And I think making it relevant to lots of the people in the audience, I want to talk about the way that the work environment is changing. So we've gone from full employment, we've had the introduction of part-time employment, we've got job shares, we've got contingent workforces. We also have apprenticeships. We have individuals who are starting from the ground, coming through. This whole transition around different ways of working can be really scary to people who are coming into that job market. Indeed. Tell us what your take is on that transition and where you see some of the sticking points from what you have seen from your business.
Yeah, and so thank you, Tim. So my starting point is where you left off, Robert. Enlightenment, and based on the data of what we see, we as ManpowerGroup, we work across the world in 80 countries. We employ 3 million people a year. We meet 10 million job seekers. We've done that for 70 plus years, here in the UK for 60 years. So we look at this data and we try to think about what's the future work, what are employees looking for, what are employers looking for. And you can clearly see an evolution where the labor markets are getting segmented, a polarized workforce, people being worried about all the things that you've heard about this morning, the impact of technology on the workforce and the work that they're doing, and the concerns around what it will mean for their children and their friends, and a skilled part of the workforce that feels that they have virtually limitless opportunities. And of course, then you see this polarization of opinion extrapolating, both of these extremes. But what you can really see is that we're becoming a much more segmented society in terms of workforce, and we're not on a pendulum that's going from one place to the other. We're adding, just as consumers, the ability to make choices and engage with work in ways that fit our lives, and also mirror the changes that are happening for organizations and the businesses that they represent and the business models that are there.
So, touching on that, you talked about the bifurcation of workforces, where there are different people in different places around the country who may be in the wrong place to take advantage of the growth, and there might be people in the right place at the right time who will take all the advantages. So there's a split there around who might get the opportunities. Are you seeing that get wider? And how, if it is just in place, how are we able to bridge between those who have the skills that we need and those who don't?
Well, the truth is that in most developed economies, knowledge work is surpassing manual work in terms of growth. And knowledge work is best done when knowledge workers are very close together, which is why urbanization is occurring all over the world. So people are moving into the cities, and in the UK, as in the US, as in lots of other places, those that are in rural areas are being left behind. Companies are not investing in those areas as much as they're investing in urban areas. And that really also is driving a great deal of polarization. And, in the end, parts of the reasons for the populism. Because in those areas, it's very difficult to see, so how is this all going to work out? And I think it's too early to call yet whether the advent of technology is actually going to give us the opportunity to do work in more remote places in a way that we haven't seen before. But right now, the structural change is still bifurcating. So urbanization is a trend that's going on all over the world, in the emerging and in the developed world, and that's where the workforce is congregating and aggregating, and the rural areas are being depopulated because that is not where knowledge work gets done best, because you have a much better opportunity to exchange, attract a skilled workforce if you're in places where lots of other people with those kinds of skills are present.
But that kind of plays against what the government is doing. The government is putting an awful lot of resources here in the UK at the very least around investing into apprenticeships like we talked about to get those individuals in maybe more rural areas to come and work in different positions. But
yes.
Is that working?
Well, I don't know if the apprenticeships or the initiatives around education are really aimed at stemming, the flow into urban areas. I think you can see government initiatives in various parts of the world that are trying to encourage, delocalization from urban centers out into, more rural areas. And by and large, they are highly unsuccessful because this is a structural change. I would say, though, that what's very interesting, as we've talked a lot about learning culture, learnability, what we call learnability, the ability to learn, being able to reskill and upskill, that we're starting to see the beginnings of what we think is the skills revolution that's going to be upskilling and reskilling the workforce at scale to a much larger degree. When you think back of all of the changes that have happened, moving from an agrarian society to industrial society or a post-industrial society into a knowledge economy, every change like this has been accompanied by a massive revolution in the educational institution and how we educate and skill up the workforce. Agrarian society to industrial society needed compulsory schooling for everybody, and if you didn't do it with your children in school, you got into trouble. That's, of course, what we have today. Post-industrial was enabling a more skilled workforce acquiring tertiary degrees or second-year, two-year degrees or certificates of various kinds.
Yep.
And I think the apprenticeship levy, clunky as it may be, the initiatives in various governments to give people money, training funds that are theirs to spend on training when they're not working or while they're working, we believe is really the beginning of this next shift. Because up until today, education occurs today just as it has over the last 50 to 60 years. It's linear, it's time-based, and it ends with people who are graduate ready, but by and large, according to many of you in the room, they're graduate ready, but they're not work ready. And apprenticeships is one way of making people work ready as opposed to just graduate ready.
And I don't want to beat up teachers because I have a huge respect for teachers, but I do agree that the education system is not maybe as fit for purpose for the new age that we're talking about. And we had Lord Holmes talking about the fourth industrial revolution as we see ourselves fit for. But and I want to touch on learnability in a second after that, but what do you encourage or are you seeing from the Manpower Group around empowering educationalists to be prepared for what you need as skills on the other side? Because it's easy to pontificate on the outside, say, it's not ready, it's not fit, the kids aren't ready to learn.
And clearly teachers, are not at fault here. I mean, this is an institutional change and it's a societal change. But what we see with organizations across the world, when we surveyed organizations 5 years ago and asked them, so how much effort are you making in terms of investing in your workforce to reskill and upskill your workforce? 20% of organizations at large said, no, we think it's a really important initiative. The same question asked 6 months ago, 70% of you say reskilling and upskilling of our own workforce is tremendously important because we can't find the people in the labor markets and we want to retrain or retain and retrain and upskill our own people so we can have them come along with us as this journey goes on. So I actually think that the corporate sector is leading the charge, and eventually what this charge looks like is much, much more iterative than episodical. So this idea of learning, earning money, learning and doing that, and we had a previous speaker, I think it was Peter, who talked about this continuous learning, building a learning culture. That will be one of the assets and capabilities that organizations are going to be building to be able to have a workforce that can adapt to the changes that are invariably happening with globalization and the impact of technology.
So you passionately talk about IQ, EQ, and now LQ, which feeds into that conversation. It was great that Kirsty facilitated that conversation there. But can you break it down for us, what actually LQ means? What is it that I take a course every single year? What is it? It's got to be much more than just getting qualifications. Yeah,
I think with the advent of data, we used to hire based on IQ, and as all of you know much better than I do, IQ is a very poor predictor of job performance. We added the emotional aspects or social aspects, communication, soft skills, and that's what we measure with EQ. But with data collection that we have, and I know we also had a discussion around what's private and what's not private in terms of data, all of you are going to be building capabilities to understand whether an individual is more likely to be able to acquire new skills at speed or not. And that measure, the LQ, the learning quotient, is something that you will start to adopt when you go through your hiring processes, and also when you try to evaluate what is it that we need to do, what skills adjacencies can we leverage to make sure we give people more skills so that they can then be successful in the organization going forward.
And what are you looking for from leaders in your own organization around that learnability, that LQ? Because essentially you are leading a very big vehicle, but you need to have inspiring, engaging leaders who are out there doing that. So what are you seeing? How are you recruiting? What are you asking them to deliver?
Well, so the good news for all leaders is that some of the things that were extremely valuable before continue to be extremely valuable also in the future.
Good.
Ability to articulate a strategy, communicate, engage and energize the organization, all of those things are still going to be very valuable. But when we talk to our leaders across the world, we talk about digital fluency. So a leader today needs to know about technology. I don't know anything about coding, but I know enough to try and understand, or at least ask the question,
Really good point.
as Anne talked about, listen and shut up, more importantly, listening enough so that I can ask the questions about technology so I understand how it will impact my business model and how I create value tomorrow compared to today. So digital literacy is extremely important, and you can only acquire that if you're curious and want to know about the changes that are happening. With the changes happening, we're also even more, even more critical to ensure that you have the right talent in the organization, because it's not a static environment. So you need diversity of thought, diverse perspectives, which is why diversity for ManpowerGroup is a strategic initiative. It powers the business strategy so that we can adjust to a changing environment.
So that sounds good, but I want to know, what does that mean? Because what does that look like on the ground? Are you looking for targets? Are you focusing on particular personal characteristics? How do you break down what diversity or hiring for diversity within your business looks like?
Well, in our world, diversity, of course, exists in all kinds, abilities, people of color, gender. Gender is the one that we have chosen across our organization globally because it's one thing that we can measure in every geography. So we start this based on our understanding of what's happening in labor markets, which is that women are underrepresented at almost all levels of the organizations. Women are generally more educated than men at this point in the developed world as well as in emerging markets. So if you want to accelerate the progress of your company and access a talent pool that is underutilized, as a country, as an organization, you need to make sure that you have women equally represented across the organization. So we believe that this will drive our business further. Of course, it's the right thing to do. The business case is well established that people with diverse organizations are performing better. So clearly, as anybody would expect, we set targets. But many organizations, I'm assuming, have targets for diversity. Do you all have targets for diversity? Yes? Who's got a target for diversity? Yeah, so you all have programs that are aiming to do the same thing. We also had programs. We didn't move the needle very much. It's only when we started to tackle this at the level of a strategic initiative that we started to move the needle. Because as you would all well know, if you have a strategy and you have a plan and it doesn't happen, what tends to happen to leaders? They get fired. If this is as important as a strategy for China, you move the needle. When we made it as important as our strategy for China, we moved the needle.
So you think that's the critical bit? It has to be something people are measured on?
Only because I was in the camp that explained, when we had it as a program, why it was difficult. We don't have the operational experience, the P&L experiences for our women to a large degree, so they were promotable. Why in the STEM skills area was difficult to find. Why from a board perspective, if you're looking for people with P&L experience, you can't put and find people onto the board. So I made all of those excuses myself. But I realized now that once we've elevated this, and this is truly, authentically part of our business strategy that we need to achieve, all of a sudden everything changes. You may have to work harder, you may have to think about this in a different way, but we've moved from 20% senior representation of our women across the world to 33, heading to 40 in a reasonable time frame, and then pushing towards 50. Our board representation is 42%. It used to be 22, which is the average of US publicly listed companies today, and we've made that change in 5 years. So in my view, based on my own experience and my own shortcomings before, it's just a matter of where in the priority does it rank. Is this something the board is going to say, yeah, no, sorry, yeah, keep on doing this, but it's not really that important, or is it really important? I happen to believe it's extremely important for the success of ManpowerGroup, and if that is true, then you put it on the rank of priority, and then you can actually shift the needle. So I've myself professed all of the difficulties in making it move, but I've also seen what happens when you elevate it and you make sure that it's part of a business strategy as opposed to a program or a target around a metric or a metric, as we have many metrics in a lot of parts of the business.
And because I respect you so much in the thing, there's a difficult question following after.
That'd be you shouting out again.
But the question, therefore, is why restrict it to one of the personal characteristics? Because all the arguments you just stated are relevant for all of them, no?
Oh, in terms of diversity?
Yes.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, so in each operation, but if you're going to rally an organization, it's helpful if you can simplify it to the greatest degree possible. But in all of our operations, we have a secondary target for diversity as well, because it all depends on what is it that's lacking that could be brought in. So in France, for instance, we want to make sure that we have a great part of the immigrant population also part of our leadership. In lots of countries, we have disabilities, so people with different abilities, bringing them fully into the world of work and into our organization. In the US, we want to bring people of color in as well. So each part of the world has a different local target, but as a global target, gender diversity, just because of its scale. It's something that we can move, and it's something where we can see a talent pool that could be highly beneficial for us to include at all levels of the organization.
Fantastic. Before I open it up to the floor, I can see people itching to dive in and take some of my love of the questioning away. The focus of our conference is about digital and humanity and how the two can interplay.
Right.
And people are worried that sometimes they feel the robots are coming. But you put out a report around the robots need not apply in terms of it. So you took a different stance. And most of us will know about Amazon. Jeff Bezos talks quite clearly about paying people a universal wage and allowing them just to move out of the way of the robots, because the drones will do it much better. They won't call in sick. Go home and rest, and then order more off your Prime account.
Right.
My wife orders a lot off the Prime account, as do I.
And myself too.
Well, why do you take the opposite view? Why do you think that humans are still important in those conversations?
Well, because it's a debate you read about, and I think we've had this discussion already here. What I find interesting, again going back to the data and enlightenment, none of the data, extrapolated or historical, points to the fact that automation will destroy more jobs than it creates. Every time in history, more jobs are created. Today, all developed countries have lost a third of their manufacturing workforce. Most countries have had significant population growth in those 15 years. And where are we today? Unemployment, 60-year low in the US, 50-year low in the US. In Europe, lowest it's been in 12 years. Lots of jobs have been destroyed. Lots of activities have been automated away. But more jobs have been created with the help of technology. So, so it's really based on an understanding of where we think it's going. Now, I think the confusion lies in technologists, and who would like to go up and argue against Jeff Bezos? So let's be clear. He gets a lot of things right, but I think the human aspect, which is exactly what this conference is all about, we forget about the human aspect. It's not what we believe. We know technology can do anything that we would want it to do. But the question is, what is it that we want it to do? We've been flying airplanes with 2 or 3 pilots for the last 30 years when the planes are actually flying themselves. And every time we try and interfere when something goes wrong, that's when the plane crashes. Human error is the cause of 95% of all plane crashes, maybe the 737-800 MAX being the exception, who knows?
Yeah.
But that's been the evolution. As long as you don't touch and mess with the airplane, basically they fly themselves, and they do so extremely safely. Yet we insist on having 2 pilots. So this idea that we will have no truck drivers in a 20-ton truck barreling down, our highways and, going through our cities, it's just not going to happen. Could it happen? Technically, maybe. Are we going to want it to happen? I don't think so. We are much greater believers in technology augmenting human capability. Now, so the flip side is, to augment human capability, you need skills. So we're exactly at the same point where we were when we moved from an agrarian society to an industrial society. We need to up and reskill a workforce at scale. All of you are upgrading, reskilling your workforce today in your business, but we need to do it for all of the people we talked about, those that are in rural areas, and ensure we can engage them. The middle skills that are going to be disappear and being replaced with things that are new. And I think the other aspect, which is very often forgotten, if you were sitting in 1910 and you had this conversation, and you said to the person you're speaking with, well, we're going to take 70% of the jobs as we know them today, which at the time would be manufacturing, agriculture, and mining, and we're going to double the size of the population, and we're going to make the 70% be 14%. Pandemonium, of course. You'd say, well, that doesn't work. We'll have more than half of the people, needing to be paid a basic income. But in actual fact, that's exactly what's happened. The 70% of jobs 100 years ago are 14% of the jobs on average in the developed world today. And we've doubled or more the population in each of those countries and created tremendous wealth and lots of new jobs. So the fact that we can't predict what the jobs are going to be today, looking out, just as it would have been very difficult to with certainty say, no, this is going to be fine, don't worry. It'll be messy for a while, and then we'll be fine. Today, it's equally hard to predict it. But I think our history and our track record, even our recent data, would indicate that that's exactly what's happening today, and that's exactly what's going to happen going forward as well. Not to say we won't have bumps in the road. There is going to be dislocation. People are going to be unhappy and not having the right skills. But that's where the focus needs to be. Reskilling and upskilling at scale, not worrying about financing basic income for 50% of the population that won't have a job, because we don't think that's actually going to play out like that.
Fantastic. Ladies and gentlemen, an amazing contribution.
Thank you.
I'll ask if they've got a question after you. Many of us will not get to Davos, but we brought a speaker from Davos to us. So that's really, really powerful. Any questions before we move on to our next session from anyone in the audience? Yes, there's one question here. Your name, your organization, and then your question, please.
Aneta Tunario. I'm a psychologist at University of East London. Persuasive argument to look back at the history and compare some of the fears and the trends, and reassuring us looking at the third industrial revolution. Would you agree that the possibility that we will have machines that determine their own purpose complicates the picture, brings the fear back in, and brings the philosophy and the need for ethics into the question?
No, so I think you're seeing the fear play out across the world. I mean, we're living in a world where, unilateralism, populism, and protectionism are creating massive uncertainties. I was at an interview session earlier this morning asking about, Brexit, of course, and all the other aspects. And these are the drivers of making it very difficult to know if right now we are in a slowing growth scenario or in the beginning of a downturn scenario. So the fear factor and the uncertainty factor related to these structural changes is very, very evident at a micro and at a macro level. So I think that's truly evident in lots of things that we see. And I think the aspects that you're talking about, ethical behavior, a lot of that is driven by transparency. Robert talked about the ability, you know, you can always find somebody who agrees with you if you go on the net, and you will find your tribe that will represent a view that, you know, looks like it's very factual, whereas it may not be. But I think a good side of all of this transparency is that ethical behavior is rising up and being much, much more visible. And it will be a big driver in terms of regaining the trust of parts of societies that have clearly not been paid attention to. The macro, the big facts would say, all of these changes have been brilliant. 1.5 billion less people in poverty, in abject poverty, funneling and fueling tremendous economic growth and lots of job opportunities for billions of people. But it's also very clear that there's part of the population that have seen wage stagnation, very little future prospects as far as they can tell, and frankly, as far as the governments can tell as well. So, you know, there's still going to be a lot of work that we need to do to address that part. Doesn't take away from the benefits of the changes, but paying attention to that, and I think that transparency is going to be very helpful in regaining the trust and making sure that we can involve everybody in this journey of evolution and the fourth industrial revolution.
Fantastic. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, please, big round of applause for Jonas Prising.
Thank you. Thank you.
Amazing.
Thank you
so much. Like we planned it.